And welcome back. This is a live look at protesters in downtown Columbia. To your left and then to your right, you're seeing protesters in Jefferson City near downtown. Now, this all comes after a protest happened last night with many people outside of City Hall in Columbia. We're actually going to send things out to ABC 17 News anchor Lucas Geisler, who is with Columbia Mayor Brian Treese. Lucas.
Deborah, just to my left here, I can see the crowds that are gathered outside City Hall right now that you saw earlier. I am joined now here in City Hall with Columbia Mayor Brian Treese. Mayor Treese, thank you very much for the time. Really appreciate you doing this.
Of course.
I suppose let's start with what is going on right outside these windows right now. Another day of protests here in Columbia, starting what we've seen in Minneapolis over the death of George Floyd, centered around really police misconduct and police relationships, particularly with the African-American community. What have been your thoughts the last few days that you've seen?
Well, first, let me thank the people of Columbia that came out to protest and protest peacefully the criminal acts that led to the death of George Floyd, an unarmed black man in Minneapolis. But I also want to thank the police officers that protected their rights to express their First Amendment protests and very legitimate anger over the events in Minneapolis that led to George Floyd's tragic end. The chief and I met with members of the African American community after Friday evening's protest, and there are a lot of anger, but we can't let that anger resort to violence, because ultimately that detracts from George Floyd's death and the issues surrounding it.
Last night, or really early this morning, there was another protest that sort of blocked off traffic there at Providence and Broadway. Some of the reporters that were out there saw very little to any police presence during that was sort of blocking up a major intersection in the city. Do you know what the plan is going to be from a law enforcement perspective on how handling these protests moving forward is going to go?
Well, I think police departments and mayors and cities across the country are learning from the unfortunate events in our own Ferguson, Missouri about, oftentimes the police tactics provoke a response that is not desired, and when we protect the protesters' right to peaceably assemble, and I think that probably yields a better outcome. But rest assured, we are not going to let destruction of property or people rule the day here. And I think we want to continue to be a community that embraces these community principles and values, that reject racism at all levels, and I'm very proud of our Columbia for doing so.
Do you believe police should be at these events, should be there in enforcement capacity, or how do you envision?
I think that's a tactical decision for the police department to make, and rest assured, I think there are limits in place as to how far these types of protests go. But again, there's very legitimate anger out in the community right now, and I think we need to protect their right to protest, but to protest peacefully.
So you've had these discussions, you said, with the African-American community. What have you heard that they want out of all of this?
Well, they want to know that we have sufficient policies in place, that there's sufficient training in place, that it couldn't happen here. And I won't say that it can't happen here, but it hasn't happened here. And I think we've all learned. Look, I was elected in 2016 on the heels of Ferguson after a period of unrest in our own community, and we began that very deliberate and often difficult conversation and dialogue about community policing and what are the tactics that are acceptable and how do we have civil discourse. And I think we're benefiting from those discussions that we've had over the last 3 and 4 years that have brought us here today.
It's an important discussion to have. I hope we can continue this coming up at 6 o'clock as well here.
Absolutely.
Mayor Treese, thank you very much for the time.
Thank you.
And Deborah, we'll send it back to you in the studio.